All right, I am back here on the podcast talking college football with USA Today's college football columnist, Dan Wolken. Dan, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I have to say, this is definitely a very unusual college football season. I remember back in August, we had doubts that a couple leagues even play. In the end, we got sort of a mishmash year. What did you think about the year as a whole?
Well, it was a tough year. And, when college football decided collectively that they were going to go forward and try to play the season, I think you would have had to have had your head buried pretty far into the sand to not realize just exactly what that was going to entail. And, I think we've tried to do the best we can as reporters, not just me, but other people, and trying to tell that story and what teams have had to go through to be able to get to this point and just how difficult it was. And, still, I'm not sure we've done the best job because there are a lot of people who, think this is easy or think that this was somewhat normal. It wasn't normal, but, we've made it basically to the finish line almost. And I think that everyone involved in college football is just going to be ready to close the chapter on this and move on and hope that 2021 is better. And once that championship game ends, there's going to be a lot of people who, exhale and have a stiff drink and sleep well because it's been a tough year.
It definitely has been a tough year. We saw a bunch of games get canceled. A lot of teams had issues with the coronavirus. Even Trevor Lawrence tested positive at one point. You think if you gave some of the big power brokers college football truth serum, do you think they would consider this year a success?
Well, if success is getting to the end, then yeah, it's been a success. Now that doesn't include a lot of other factors, and a lot of people got COVID, and a lot of schools dealt with various hardships, some of which we know about, some of which we don't. But the bottom line is, college football felt like they had to play this year because of money, and I think you can take a step back and question whether or not this year maybe exposed that the economic model in college football is completely out of whack and completely unfair. I mean, the players had to take on this responsibility, this risk, and they didn't get compensated for it. And I think that's exposed a fundamental issue that is going to have to be dealt with at some point. But I think that for these schools, the immediate need was to get the TV money, and it looks like they're going to do that, and they're going to try to minimize the damage and come back next year and try to get back in line with the way it was before.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Obviously, the big storyline this week is getting ready for the college football playoff. We have our four teams: Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Notre Dame. And there was a lot of controversy down the stretch about the metrics the selection committee was using to pick these teams, and sort of felt like the big four got locked in after that Clemson Notre Dame game. So, what's your take on this controversy in terms of teams like Cincinnati, Texas A&M, just feeling like their game started to even count?
Look, the college football playoff selection committee has been nothing if not consistent over the years, uh, which is that they pick the teams that they think are the four best, and there's enough leeway and vagueness written into the rules that they can do whatever they want. And so anyone who didn't see Ohio State coming on this, that's on them. Like, it was very clear that Ohio State was going to get in as long as they went undefeated. As far as Texas A&M and Cincinnati, look, Notre Dame, despite how bad they looked in the final game, it was just very obvious that they were going to be the number four team. They had the best win of the year over Clemson. They had beaten North Carolina, which was a top 15 win, clearly better than anything that Texas A&M had done as their second best win. So when you just did a resume to resume comparison, Notre Dame was clearly in better position than A&M. And as far as Cincinnati, I mean, they're just like I would have put Cincinnati in, but they're never going to put a group of five team in as long as it's four teams. It's just never going to do it.
Yeah, would you feel the Bearcats do have the biggest gripe here? Because, I mean, they did go undefeated, yet they saw their ranking keep dropping even when they weren't playing games. And it felt like, well, Ohio State only played six, but Cincinnati got punished for not playing as many games. I feel like that was sort of their argument here.
Well, look, Cincinnati could have done anything this year, and they would have ended up in the exact same position. Played as many games, whatever opponents. They were not getting in the top four. Like, the committee's not going to put in an American Athletic Conference team in the top four. Period. End of story. And so Cincinnati ended up. They could have played those other games. They were going to end up in the exact same place. That's a fundamental issue with the system. That's got nothing to do with Cincinnati or the schedule they played. That's the system. And until it expands to 8, and even then, I'm not so sure. But until it expands to 8, if you're in a Group of 5 conference, you have no hope of getting in.
Yeah, I definitely think that makes some sense. I don't think people also realize this also is TV motivated, I'm sure, because when you have the ratings that Notre Dame brings opposed to Cincinnati, it's got to be a factor, at least in the back of their minds, and they don't want to admit it.
I don't think anyone in that committee room is discussing TV ratings. I don't think they're looking at this and saying, boy, that Notre Dame Alabama matchup, that'd be great for television. I don't think they're saying that. But there is baked into college football a belief that if you come from a Group of 5 conference, that you have not played as tough of a schedule, that you have not played as difficult of a, you've not had as difficult of a road. And, there is brand bias in, it's the same teams over and over and over again every single year. And so they get the benefit of the doubt. And Alabama a couple years ago, they get the benefit of the doubt because that even though they didn't win their conference, they had one loss and they have the best players. Every single year they look at how they recruit, and it's eye test. And so there is a brand bias, but I don't think it's necessarily, this team will generate more TV ratings. I don't think the committee's talking about that.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think it might be more of a subconscious thing, but we do have our game set. First game is Alabama and Notre Dame, and this is one I'm interested to see how Notre Dame plays, because in the past they've gotten to some of these college football playoff games. They've laid eggs on the big stage. Do you think there's any chance this is different for Notre Dame? Is this going to be like an Alabama like steamroll?
Look, I think it's more likely than not that Alabama wins the game and wins the game comfortably. But I don't think that that's necessarily a knock on Notre Dame. I think that's just Alabama being that much better than everybody else. So you're talking about an Alabama team that the lowest offensive output they've had all year long was 38 points in the season opener. Every other game they've been in the 40s and 50s, and that's tough. So I think Notre Dame as a program has continually improved. They've continually gotten better players. They're more physical. I think their defensive line, they really, really match up well, with the other teams in the playoff. They've got NFL players up front, and maybe that'll be a way that they can slow Alabama down, stop the running game. They can pressure Mac Jones. We'll see. Like, they were good enough to beat Clemson. They out physicaled Clemson in that first meeting. So I think they're capable. It's just they're up against, one of the great offenses of all time.
Yeah, I think that would make some sense. I think the more intriguing game is the second game of the day. And again, talking to Dan Wolken of USA Today, talking about the Clemson-Ohio State matchup, the matchup of potentially the two top picks in the NFL draft, and Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
I don't think this is going to be a good game, personally. Ohio State has shown nothing this year to indicate that they're capable of playing with Clemson. And I don't think that's about their talent. Like, they clearly have great talent, but their season has just been so disjointed and so bereft of continuity and momentum that their level of play has just not been that high. And when you have to, play a week and take 2 weeks off and then play 2 and then take 3 weeks off, like, they played one game since Thanksgiving. And, I just don't think that they've had the continuity this year from week to week to build a solid core, a solid foundation of who they are. And I think that's why you've seen when they played Indiana and when they played Northwestern, why their offense has kind of looked kind of mediocre. And I just don't see them having it all click and fall into place this weekend. I think Clemson wins big.
Yeah, and obviously the New York fans here might be more invested because Justin Fields will be in the mix that second pick. The Jets are sitting there at number 2. Based on what you've seen out of him this year, like how would you describe his game and how you think he can translate to the next level?
Well, I think he's going to have a great chance to be a good NFL quarterback. Like, he's got incredible tools. This year's just been a bit of a disaster, and And I think what teams are going to have to ask themselves, and this is not for me to figure out, like this is for the teams who are drafting, is, Justin Fields is a guy who made tremendous progress from the time he got into college to last season, when he clearly looked like he was on the same type of level with Trevor Lawrence. And then this year you've seen, what looks like a regression, but it might just be like I talked about earlier, the lack of continuity, not having your same receivers, not having the time to gel and kind of just get your feet under you. Like, is his lack of production in some of these games a product of uh, the circumstances, or did he regress? And those NFL teams who are drafting in those spots 2 through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are going to have to figure that out.
Yeah, they absolutely will. And obviously, it sounds like you're picking Alabama and Clemson would be your leans here. If those two meet in the title game, who would you like to win that game?
I've liked Alabama all year long. I just think that the way their offense has been built, it's so dynamic. It's so well designed. Mac Jones has been so good at getting the ball where it needs to be. He's not made a ton of mistakes. Obviously, Clemson's a great team as well. Their talent from top to bottom is unquestioned. I just think that in a game where you have to keep scoring, I think Alabama's just got a little bit of an edge in terms of receivers. I think they've got a little bit of an edge in terms of special teams, and I think their offensive line and their running game is better. So, Clemson a couple years ago was a pretty big underdog and just destroyed Alabama in the championship game, and maybe that'll happen again. But you just from early in the season, Alabama to me looked like the team that had the most upside and the most togetherness and the most continuity, and you just see it in their production. They're really really tough to stop.
Yeah, they are really tough to stop. It'll be a fun game if we get it. And obviously, there's a lot of other bowl action going on. I know there have been a lot of games that have had like issues. The coronavirus been canceled, postponed. Of the stuff that's still on the schedule as of recording on Wednesday afternoon, what game intrigues you the most on the non-CFP games?
None of the above. I mean, most of these games are a bit of a joke. A lot of opt outs, a lot of players who are just shutting it down for the year. Don't blame them, certainly. I mean, we had one yesterday where a guy played a half and then shut it down, and wasn't injured, just only played for a half. Like, it's an unusual circumstance. I don't think most of these teams really care. I think they're just playing out the string. I'd be surprised, and then you get like a Fiesta Bowl where, Oregon, with all due respect, like they shouldn't be there. They didn't win their division. They won their championship game, but they only played in the championship game because the team that won the division had COVID issues. So none of these games particularly excite me. This is really all about the playoff at this point. These other games are even more sort of exhibitionish than they normally are.
You also have to think that for a lot of these teams that you don't get the typical pageantry of the whole bowl experience, because obviously in COVID protocol is basically going there, you work, practicing, staying in your hotel, and going back. So a lot of these guys might not care as much as they normally would.
Yeah, these are like regular season road trips. It's in and out, and they're playing the game. They're not there's no big fun events, no parades, no prime rib eating competitions or whatever it is they do. The incentives are not necessarily there, like for most of these teams to have fun. Most of the time, these bowl games are a reward, and it's a good like team bonding thing. This year, it's not a reward. In fact, in some cases, it seems like kind of a burden because most of these players, after the year they've had, would just as soon be home and moving on to whatever their next thing is.
Yeah, indeed. And last thing I want to talk about is obviously it feels weird we haven't awarded the Heisman Trophy yet, but obviously we're waiting. That's coming up soon. So who would you say is the favorite now? Is it Trevor Lawrence?
My sense of it is that Devontae Smith has probably got the edge in among the voters. That's an unscientific observation. That's just kind of monitoring the momentum and late in the season, people really taking notice of what he did and how many passes he caught in the SEC championship game where I think he kind of went in there as maybe a slight favorite. Lawrence made a push at the end and played great in the ACC championship game. Maybe just the way the voting works, the Alabama guys will kind of split the vote. But my guess is Devontae Smith will win it.
All right, there you have it. Dan Wolken, thanks for all the time today. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow you on social media and keep up with your coverage on USA Today?
Yeah, at Dan Wolken on Twitter, and then just USA Today Sports.
All right, Dan, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and there you have it. That was Dan Wolken talking college football playoff. Fun conversation there. Up next, we're going to our Week 17 NFL picks with Alan Austin right after this.